seven deadly sins. You heard of them? They're not the seven kind of deadly sins, or the seven like completely deadly sins, like they'll kill you, right? But I wonder if that's really the way we think about them. A lot of it comes from Catholic theology and history. In case you don't know that, all basically we learn in the church today kind of comes through that at some point. There's a guy named Evagrius. He first drew up a list of what he called the 8 offenses and wicked human passions. And he put them in order. And the order was basically this: gluttony, lust, avarice, sadness, anger, acedia, vainglory, and pride. Who knows what acedia is? Yeah, I don't know either. It's from the Greek word which means I don't care. We know what that is, right? In the late 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great, I'm teaching about pride today, so Pope Gregory the Great, I'm not sure that all comes together. But anyway, he reduced these 8 things into 7 things, and he folded vainglory into pride, acedia into sadness. And what he basically came up with was a list of what he put was most serious sins to the least serious sins. And so it went pride, envy, anger, sadness, avarice, gluttony, and lust. And then later on, a bunch of other people like Thomas Aquinas and others contradicted this notion that you could have a sin that was more serious than another sin, because all sin is sin. All sin is sin. That's true. But we have to admit that, stealing a piece of candy and murder is not completely the same. Well, we get there, right? But all sin separates us from God. Yes? All right, later on, a bunch of people put it together and they came up with this list of the 7 deadly sins. Here they are: pride, anger, envy, greed, gluttony, sloth, and lust. I'll make sure to preach the gluttony one around Thanksgiving, just for you guys, all right? I'm just kidding. I wouldn't ruin Thanksgiving for anybody. But in 1999, an even greater theologian came out with an even better way, I think, to teach it. And I'm not trying to mock it, but I'm saying that Stephen Hildebrand, when he came out with SpongeBob, and he used all the characters in the 7 deadly sins, that he kind of made it applicable to us. Are you guys with me? Who likes SpongeBob? My wife hates SpongeBob. She won't even let me turn it on in the house. She says our children are not to watch it. So whether you like it or whether you don't like it, or whether you agree with MTV, which I generally do not, and whether you watch Nickelodeon or not, I do think that you can learn a little something about the 7 deadly sins from SpongeBob SquarePants. Number 1. It is rumored that Hildebrand used these 7 deadly sins to come up with his people. So here we go. Sloth would be Patrick, because sloth is laziness and unwillingness to act. Obviously it's Patrick, because he lays under a rock all day and he does nothing. In fact, they even had an episode called The Big Pink Loser, in which he did nothing. Okay, that's sloth. And then we got wrath, which would be Squidward. Okay, Squidward is angry at everybody about everything, and pretty much seems pretty American, frankly. He hates all of his life. He hates SpongeBob. He hates crabs. He hates, well, he's just angry. Okay? And then we have Mr. Krabs, of course, is greed. Everyone got that one. Envy would be Plankton, because he's angry that Mr. Krusty Krab, has a chum bucket and his job is a failure and it drives him to steal everything all day long. You guys have watched it, you know what I'm talking about. Gluttony would be Gary. Okay, we don't see much from Gary, but we do know this, that there's this running saga there. Don't feed Gary. Remember, you got to feed Gary. Gary even ran away once because SpongeBob forgot to feed him. And usually, basically, gluttony means that we overindulge, and food is one of the ways in which we do that. Then we have pride, which is Sandy, right? Sandy takes a lot of pride in who she is, where she comes from. She comes from Texas. She's very proud of the fact that she's from Texas, and she's also an air breather. Okay, and there's a whole episode about how she tries to prove that land animals are better than sea animals, and so pride is Sandy. The weird one, really, is SpongeBob, because SpongeBob is based on this 7 deadly sin of lust. Well, if you watch SpongeBob, they don't even say if it's a boy or a girl, okay? But I looked it up, it's a boy, okay? So what you have is lust. What does that mean? So I read it. Lust, in one definition, is excessive love of others and wanting everyone to love you. Is that SpongeBob? Okay. So what we got basically is this. Not a joke, but a real serious thing. Because sin is deadly. Why is it deadly? Because sin, all sin, separates us from God. All sin separates us from God. And it's super dangerous. Because we're supposed to be careful about sin, but a lot of times we're not. And God hates sin, but we don't really hate sin. In fact, a lot of times we kind of like it. We even take things like pride and we celebrate it. I think after today you might see that it might not necessarily be a good thing. Here's a verse out of Hebrews I wanted to throw at you. Hebrews 12:1, the second part of the verse. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. What does sin so easily do? Yeah, it entangles us. Can you imagine swimming and getting caught up in the kelp? You know, that's kind of, I think, the picture we're supposed to get here. It kind of entangles you, and all of a sudden, you think you're swimming, but really all of a sudden you're sinking. And sin does that to us. And so today I'd like to take a short look, really, at the look of the sin of pride. You could probably preach about pride every Sunday. And I could certainly preach about it for 2 or 3 Sundays, but I'm going to try to put a lot into one Sunday, okay? So you guys do anything for the next couple hours? You guys got an extra hour today. I know you did. Yeah, it won't take that long. There's probably nothing as humbling as putting together a sermon on pride. Why? Well, because as soon as you start looking at the scriptures and you're going to stand up in front of people and preach about pride, you know that we all have that problem. We all do. I have a friend who, they don't go to this church. Sometimes people come to me for marriage counseling. Some of them are pastors. And, you know, I'm happy to do it because marriage is a big deal, you know, and family is important to God. But hopefully they don't watch the video. A few weeks ago, I got the sense that the guy might have some issues that maybe he didn't see. And so I asked him to look at some scriptures and I sent him away and told him to really consider, you know, the cross of Christ. And how, you know, these desires that he has for his wife are, you know, maybe not biblical. And so he came back last Monday and he sat in my office and I said, have you prayed through this? Have you thought about it? He said, yeah, I did. I talked to God all about it. He said, it's all her problem. Touche, right? I'm like, okay, let's start over. You might think about this pride problem. Anyway, Christians like to classify sins, just like those old guys I was reading about. They like to classify them. Well, this one's worse, and this one's least, and you got murder, you know, then adultery's not that bad, carjacking is bad, but maybe stealing is not as bad. That's not the way it works, because all sin, like I said, separates us from God. But you gotta be honest about these 7 deadly sins. Pride really is a very serious sin. And all sins really kind of fall out of the sin of pride, don't they? I mean, wasn't it pride that caused Satan to want to put his throne up above God's? And really, when you think about it, Eve was deceived, but wasn't it kind of pride that caused her to want to know what God knew? And wasn't it Adam also? I mean, he just blew it basically, but there was pride involved as well. In fact, I say that all sins, if you will, kind of pour out of this sin of pride. Who's ever heard of this thing going on in Denver, this marijuana thing? You heard about that? Yeah, I think a lot of young people. I heard that the University of Denver doubled or quadrupled their enrollments this last year. Did you hear that? There's a huge increase. Why? Because marijuana is now legal. And people on the other side say, well, this is bad because marijuana is a gateway drug. It leads to all these other drugs. And I'm not really sure where the answer is, but I know this for sure. Pride is a gateway sin. Pride is a sin that leads you to all these other sins. Let's wrote a few things down. See if this is true. Pride leads to greed when we feel that self does not have enough. And maybe somebody else has more. Right? Pride leads to envy when we feel self has not received its due. Pride leads to wrath when we feel self has been offended, wronged in some way. Pride leads to a critical outlook when we feel self has been injured. And I could go on and on and on. In your bulletin today, you see some fill-ins, and they're not high-tech. My secretary just looks at what I'm going to preach and takes out some of the words, and you can fill them in. But you'll see Proverbs 6, 16 through 19. And I would like to read this out of the Amplified Bible. I don't do that very often because it's not an exact translation, but I think the way the Amplified Bible looks at these verses will teach us something. Would you read with me? The sixth thing the Lord hates. Indeed, 7 are an abomination to him. And then starts giving a list. A proud look. The spirit that makes one overestimate himself or herself and underestimate others. A lying tongue. A hand that sheds innocent blood. A heart that manufactures wicked thoughts and plans. Feet that are swift in running to evil. A false witness who breathes out lies, even under oath. And he who just sows discord among his brethren. Father, today I thank you for Chris and the guys leading us in worship. Father, I pray that our hearts would be turned toward you. And God, in every one of us is this sin of pride. I know it's true. God, help us to see it. Help us to be more like you and less like our sinful nature, Father. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen? Fact. If you make a list of sins like the ones I showed you before, or really any list of sins, pride is going to be found in every single list of sins. I found this quote by C.S. Lewis, and I really like it. See if you think it's true. There's one vice of which no man in the world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and which hardly any people except Christians ever imagine they are guilty of themselves. Pride. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. I don't really know about his religious teaching, but I read a little bit about Benjamin Franklin. I do know that he understood this sin of pride. Here's a quote from him. There is perhaps none of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Beat it down, stifle it, and mortify it as much as one pleases, it is still alive. Even if I could conceive that I have completely overcome it, I would probably be proud of my humility. The sin of pride, I think, more easily entangles us than any other. And why? Because it celebrates self. It always focuses on self. And the truth is, self loves itself, doesn't it? We do. The scriptures are real clear about it. No one hates his body. We take care of our bodies, and we want things our way. And so pride tries to advance itself in every single way possible. One of my favorite authors is Max Lucado. Anybody else? Just has a real ability to take words and make a picture in your mind. And he wrote this. The self-centered see everything through their self, their motto. It's all about me. The flight schedule, the traffic, the dress styles, the worship styles, the weather, the work. Everything is filtered through the mini-me in the eye. We all have a little bit of that, don't we? I mean, the traffic is always there to slow me down. And people are always, getting in line at Kroger right before I get there. Sure enough, when I get there, wouldn't you know, got to get a price check because it would happen to me, right? Who's been there? Yes. What exactly, though, is pride? I mean, we know we see it in other people, right? But what is it? Aren't there good kinds of pride? I mean, I think we take the word pride, we just throw it out there. It's probably pretty much always not good. But there are some things, I think, like self-respect that's kind of God-centered. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that kind of a pride maybe would be good. And I'm not sure I'm giving it justice, but bear with me a little. What about this one? Dignity. Human dignity. I think pride in the fact that we're human, that God made us, that His fingerprints are on us. If you did it right, I think maybe it could not be a sinful thing. What about a satisfaction in doing a job well? At the end of the day, you close the desk drawer or put the shovel down, whatever it is, you say, I did a good job today. I feel good about my effort. And not necessarily about self, but about, maybe God, a way to show God.
What about joy in seeing others succeed? I mean, I could take pride in my children a little. Would that be bad? I think it would be bad if it was hyper, and we do that a lot, We, Americans especially, we're creating a lot of prideful little narcissists. So you can take it to an extreme degree, but I think you could take some pride in helping someone. Maybe doing marriage counseling or something. I take a little pride when I see things go well. But it can't be about me, can it? Bad kinds, well, certainly conceit, egotism, narcissism, an attitude that I'm always kind of like superior to other people, arrogance, boasting. Has anyone listened to any rap music lately? I'm not just picking on rap music. I don't know. But I gotta admit it. There's some Christian rappers, there's some good rappers, but man, turn on a little bit of rapping and you're like, dude, shut up about yourself for a second. Right? It seems like there's a lot of that. Anyway, I was throwing this verse out there, James 4:16. You boast and you brag. All such boasting is kind of bad. No, all such boasting is evil. Well, I live in this community. Well, I go to work at this place. Well, I drive this kind of vehicle. Well, I eat this kind of food. Well, this, that, and the other thing. All such boasting is evil because it's prideful. It comes from a prideful place. Well, I live in Oakland. Well, I live in Kettering. Stop. What's next? The color of your skin? What's next? The language you speak? The country? The religion? Pride leads us to brag, and bragging is sin. Now, who's in their 50s or 60s here? Don't raise your hands. You know who you are. When we were young, there was a guy named Cassius Clay. And Cassius Clay was a boasting dude, right? You might know him as Muhammad Ali, right? Muhammad Ali was never shut up. He just wouldn't. It was kind of funny, how he'd just go on and on. It kind of was his trademark to boast. But one day, he got in an argument with the flight attendant. And he used to call himself Superman, and all this kind of stuff. And she said, you need to buckle your seatbelt. But he wouldn't do it. And she said, you got to buckle your seatbelt. He said, Superman don't need no seatbelt. And she said, well, Superman don't need no plane. She put him in his place. Anyway, I think maybe we could use a little bit of that. Simply put, pride is the assumption that we are somehow better than someone else, that we are somehow more important than other people. And Christians do that too, don't we? Well, we're not like the Methodists, the Presbyterians. It's either Jesus paid it all, and all to him I owe, or it's pride. And I think we all need to maybe take a look at it. I got some things I want to throw you today. Write them down. I'm not giving you an exhaustive list. I've read and thought, and I'm going to give you some things that I think might be indicators that you could have a pride problem. I think we all have one, but this could maybe be one that's causing more trouble than you think. First of all, a spotty prayer life. A spotty prayer life. Raise your hand if you're awesome at prayer. Bam! Okay, so raise your hand if you're humble. There you go. So we got to be careful, right? Listen, if you think you're awesome at prayer, you might have a pride problem. We need to talk later. A spotty prayer life suggests that we don't actively rely on God because we think we can run it without His help. It happens in churches. It happens to pastors. It happens in homes and jobs. It happens all over the place. And it is not true. We all need God. And you can do a lot of things in the church without the Holy Spirit. You can. But you won't do anything that pleases God. And so we need to get on our knees, no matter how many gifts we've been given, how much talent we have. And a spotty prayer life indicates a lot of times that we don't think we really need it. And it leads to a second symptom. I'm just going to call it weariness. weariness. When you do things on your own power, you lose steam. Right? You get weary. It's an inevitable result of a prideful person trying to do things in their own ability. But if you gave it to God, how could you get tired? You didn't have to worry about it. Right? When you take it all on yourself, and you think you're in charge of everything, then you do get weary. Carrying the world is very heavy. Carrying a church is heavy. Carrying a family or anything really is heavy. You've got to give it to God. And here's what I think happens almost immediately. We get angry. We get mad. And anger can indicate that, God is not doing things our way. His timing is not the way we like it. We get upset when things don't go our way. Don't we? If you're overly angry, we'll get into that in another deadly sin, you might think about the pride problem. It's not about you. When you ignore God's guidance, you will get angry, for sure. But what about this? We see this a lot. A critical spirit. I know people, when they walk in a room, the room gets darker. You know them? Call them sunshine, because it gets brighter when they leave. It's sad. But a lot of us are like that. We're just critical. And I know some of you, because you're my friends on Facebook. Golly! Is everything that bad? It's not. By the way, me and you are the best on Facebook. Who's Tony's friend on Facebook? Friend of the day. Don't let that pride puff you up, Tony. Tony's kind of excited today because he's going to be a grandfather. Anyway, I did that like 8 times. A critical spirit is often found in prideful people, you see, because they look down on others and they try to lift themselves up. They see themselves as inflated. And so when you're inflated, everything is working against you, isn't it? And if it's not going your way, then it's a problem. What about this? Prideful people, or an indication that you might have a problem with pride, is that you're always taking responsibility for the successes, but never taking responsibility for the right. I'm serious. It doesn't matter what it is. If you have a pride problem, it's never your fault, but it's always your doing. Not good, my friends. If something goes well at work, you make sure that you get on, right? But we might have lost sight of God's graciousness and the fact that every provision is from Him, and we don't deserve any of it. That's the truth. Prideful people are very impatient people. They're impatient about having to listen. They're impatient about having to wait, to serve other people. They don't like to be anonymous. They don't like to be led by someone else. Right? Right. And then, of course, I think all of it leads to vanity. But we get vain. How many mirrors do you have in your house? Yeah. You might have a vanity problem if you're in middle school. Where's the middle schoolers? Right over there. That's my son Dan. He spends about an hour on his hair every morning. I told you I'd get you, Dan. Listen, Max Lucado said this. Suppose you're in a group photo, and the first time you see the picture, where do you look? And if you look good, do you like the picture? Yeah. But if you're the only one who looks good, do you still like the picture? If someone's cross-eyed and others have spinach on their teeth, but you still look good, do you still like the picture? Right. If that's what makes you like it even more, you might have a bad case of pride. Max Lucado. And stubbornness. Proverbs 29:1 says this. One who is often reproved yet remains stubborn will suddenly be broken beyond healing. Who's ever heard of Mark Driscoll? There's a really kicking church out in Puget Sound. It's called Mars Hill. If you read in the news, in the last few weeks there's been some turmoil there, and this week Mars Hill announced that their pastor had resigned. His issue is, I think, self-owned. He said it's pride. And I don't know how many people they got in the church. I mean, it's maybe 100,000 people. It's huge. And this week they announced that they will sell all their properties and liquidate the church. Pride cometh before a. I take no pride in the fact that a church that was doing great things is now figuring out who's going to get the chairs and who's going to get the stuff. But the proverb is true. One who is often reproved yet remains stubborn will suddenly be broken beyond healing. And Mark will tell you in his own writings that they came at him over and over and over again and said, Pastor, you can't have this attitude toward people. But here's what happens. Stubbornness causes us to shun needed correction. Who needs correction? Who likes correction? Who likes correction from their spouse? My son raises his hand. She's going to see the video, Aaron. What happens is this. It makes us unable to stop defending ourselves. When we're stubborn, we just can't stop defending ourselves. If someone points out a flaw, then we evade it, we deny it, or we blame somebody else. And that's what happens when you have this stubbornness that leads to this prideful problem. Do you ever find yourself being super defensive? Yes, we all do it. What about a good friend? Do you have a good friend that does that? We immediately know who it is. A spouse, a parent, a sibling, a pastor. Do you ever have a hard time admitting that you are absolutely 100% wrong? This is stubbornness. It's caused by pride. And it separates you from the God you say you follow. That's the truth. That's the God's honest truth. God hates pride. God hates sin, and God hates pride. We can put them both in the same bucket. We don't really hate sin, and we really kind of like pride. And as a result, we wind up in all kinds of places doing all kinds of things that we should not do. We think all kinds of things that we should not think. And we're hurting ourselves. That's probably the first result. We hurt ourselves, don't we? We do. I found this quote this week. When the head starts swelling, the mind stops growing. You think that's true? See, pride keeps us from getting the help we need. You know, nobody's really going to get help until they realize that they desperately need it, right? But pride keeps you from doing it. In order to walk into a marriage counselor and say, man, we got a serious problem, you got to put down your pride. You got to be in a broken spot. Before you can realize you have a financial problem, you have to admit it, right? You'll never ask for help. I had a friend who had $100,000 in revolving credit card debt and not a good job. Not. Well, they finally reached out for help. Pride. What about parenting problems? I know parents, this is not you, who have one kid who know everything about parenting and won't reach out for it. I know how to do it. I got 10 kids, buddy. I have no idea how to do it. Professional problems, office problems, work problems, traffic problems, it's always someone else's fault. It hurts us. And pride always says this, I'd rather look smart than be smart. Pride also hurts other people. It hurts us, but it hurts other people. Proverbs 10:17. People who accept correction are on the pathway to life, but people who ignore it will always lead other people astray. See, the thing about prideful, mean, arrogant, weird people, they want to take everyone with them. Because misery loves right. Why? I don't know. But that's what happens. Or Proverbs 13:10. Pride leads to arguments. Those who take advice are wise. I didn't put this one in here today, but I know it's true. That wounds from a friend are sweeter than kisses from an enemy. I would rather have a friend come up and say, Jim, this is going to hurt, bud. You might want to sit down. Because in the end, if it cuts away pride, does it not get us closer to God? Can it get us closer to God? And that's what we desperately need. We sing songs about the cross and the blood, but we don't realize we need them. God, I pray this is made true. That we become people. I want Him to make me a person who's just not prideful. Because then I think I would know Him better. And as a result, then I can translate maybe, our need for Him. And not only does it hurt others, it hurts us, but it hurts our relationships. Doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Yes.
You know it's true. Because selfless giving builds relationships, but pride, it erodes our relationships. Any argument in a marriage, a church, a school, work, none of them would even exist if it wasn't for pride. They would just fade away. Arrogance, all comes from pride. And so, I think probably the greatest problem is that it erodes our relationship with Christ. It just does. I read once and have taught many times, I believe it to be true, that God cannot teach us anything until He does away with our pride. Because you're not listening. You have to have the ears to hear. The key to reconciliation is for us to simply swallow our pride, and if it helps, remember, pride is non-fattening. You guys can come up. There is an antidote to pride. It's called humility. Humility is the opposite of, but it's not the woe is me kind of humility. It's not the, oh, I can't do anything, I'm just a lump of mud kind of humility. It's not that. It's humility that thinks rightly of itself. God says, I have made you. I have ordained you. I've appointed you. I've gifted you. And I'm giving you some things to do. And here's what they are. That person's not doing anything. They're doing lots of things, right? They're not doing anything. Humility, Charles Spurgeon says, is this. Humility is a right estimate of oneself. It's standing in God's light and looking at yourself and recognizing who you are and what He wants from you and how He wants it from you. To be prideful is to be about something that God hates. And to be prideful actually is to oppose God and to refuse grace. James 4:6. But He gives us more grace. That is why the Scripture says God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. This week I was reminded that the Apostle Paul was given a thorn in the flesh by God. This guy's going out, he's slaying the world, he's bringing the gospel to Gentiles, he's with Jesus, learning from Him, personally, from the resurrected Christ, and he goes out and he brings us pretty much everything we know about the church today. But God gave him a thorn in the flesh. We don't even know what it is, but we know it was something bad because Paul prays over and over again, God, remove this thorn. Some people think it was a horrible eye disease, that he had muck and nastiness running down his face and they didn't know what to do. We know that from some of his writings, he writes really big. He talks about how he was a burden to people. He was a burden because of the sickness that he had. And he prays over and over and over, and you know what God said to him? No. I need you to have this thorn, Paul, so that you can be humble and be my servant. You trying to get the thorns out of your life? Are you sitting next to the thorns in your life? Maybe I can be a thorn in your life. I don't know. Father, thank you for today, for this crisp morning, for an extra hour of sleep. God, for friends, for your truth, for your spirit. Father, I pray that you would shine your light. And when it shines on us, God, I pray that you'd expose to every one of us
pride. Help us, God, to eradicate it. Will you help us do it, Father? And I pray it in Jesus' name.